Hello, friends. America, or more precisely the United States, was shaped by waves of immigration, and one of the biggest, truly massive waves was made up of Irish immigrants. The potato blight, also known as late blight or phytophthora, struck Ireland in 1845, but it hit especially hard in 1847, a year known in Ireland as Black 47. Around 1 million people died, and another 1 million fled the country. This marked the beginning of large-scale Irish migration to the U.S., but America didn't exactly welcome them with open arms. Protestants of English, Dutch, and German descent who had been living in the U.S. for over 2 centuries looked down on this influx of poor, uneducated Catholic Irish. Tensions grew, and Irish immigrants were often pushed into segregated neighborhoods. Good jobs were hard to come by. They were often left with the lowest paid, least respected work. Their overall standard of living was far below that of the Anglo-German Protestant majority. As a result, the criminal underworld of cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia began to fill up with Irish gang members. As early as the 1840s and 1850s, street gangs like the 40 Thieves, the Dead Rabbits, and many others were taking shape in New York. If you want the full picture, check out Herbert Asbury's book, The Gangs of New York, or watch the film starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Back then, some of the most prominent Irish gang leaders were Edward Monk Eastman and Paul Kelly of the 5 Points Gang. But by the 1880s, a new wave of Italian immigrants, particularly Sicilians, brought something much more organized and disciplined: the Mafia. The Italians were just as poor and Catholic as the Irish, but were treated even worse by the Anglo-German Protestant mainstream. They were darker-skinned Southerners, and there was a strong racial prejudice against them. The first known Italian crime group in New York was the Morello family, a tightly knit, family-based organization with strict internal codes and discipline. The Irish gangs, by contrast, were often disorganized, short-lived, and constantly fighting among themselves. They were less of a mafia and more like loosely organized crews of thieves, smugglers, gambling racketeers, and brothel protectors. But the sudden rise of a strong rival, the Morello family, the Black Hand, and later other Sicilian clans, forced the Irish gangs to unite for survival. Crews like the Hudson Dusters, Gopher Gang, and others managed to form a temporary alliance under the name the White Hand Gang, which, for a few years in the early 20th century, managed to resist Sicilian expansion into New York's waterfront. However, lacking structure and discipline, the Irish alliance soon fell apart. Infighting and turf wars tore the White Hand Gang apart by 1925. Then came Prohibition, enacted in 1919, and for the criminal underworld, it was like striking gold. A full-on smuggling boom began, with illegal alcohol pouring in from Canada and beyond. The Irish gangs got in on the bootlegging business quickly and successfully, but soon turned on each other again, opening the door for Sicilian mafiosi to push them out of this lucrative market. What followed was all-out bootlegger war. Jewish gangsters like Dutch Schultz and Bugsy Siegel entered the scene. The star of the future Cosa Nostra, Lucky Luciano, began his rise. New mafia families formed in New York, the foundations of what would become the legendary 5 Families. Even within the Italian mob, there was a generational war. Young bosses like Lucky Luciano led a violent purge against the old-school Mustache Petes. In New York's ports, gunfire became a daily sound. The Thompson submachine gun settled more disputes than words ever could. On Valentine's Day in 1929, Al Capone's men gunned down members of Bugs Moran's crew in a Chicago garage. Moran, the son of French-Canadian immigrants, was the kingpin of Chicago's North Side. In fact, the infamous hit on Moran's gang instantly boosted the global fame of the Tommy gun. Many gangsters even nicknamed themselves Tommy, emphasizing how they settled things. Their weapons of choice: the Colt 1911, the Luger Parabellum, and various revolvers. Their go-to melee weapons included folding knives, especially the Spanish navaja, along with straight razors and other easily concealed blades. There was even a kind of dark fashion trend, drive-by shootings with Thompsons, where shooters leaned out of car windows to spray bullets at rivals exiting bars or shops. Gang wars raged up and down the East Coast. In the Hudson River, fishermen regularly pulled up corpses with so-called concrete shoes, feet set in hardened cement buckets. Both sides suffered heavy losses and had to mobilize. The Irish brought in criminals fleeing British rule back in Ireland, while the Mafia recruited fresh soldiers straight from Sicily. These newcomers arrived wielding their favorite weapons, the lupara, a sawn-off shotgun, and the garrote, a strangling wire on a stick. By 1925, Mafia dominance was undeniable. The Italians took control of the ports and the best markets. The Irish gangs weren't wiped out, but they were pushed to the margins. From this point on, Cosa Nostra, the Italo-Sicilian Mafia, became the leading force in America's organized crime. Even though there were twice as many Irish immigrants as Italians, the Mafia's superior organization and discipline won out over the Irish gangs' constant infighting and lack of cohesion. Leaving the Mafia was not an option. Once you were in for life. The code of omertà, or deadly silence, was sacred. The ruling Mafia councils functioned like shadow governments. The Mafia dominated organized crime fully until the 1960s. But starting in the 60s and through the 90s, a series of powerful federal crackdowns weakened Cosa Nostra. This gave the Irish underworld a second wind, a kind of renaissance. In cities like Boston, strong and well-organized Irish crews rose again. Some ex-members of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, who had fought in Ulster for Northern Ireland's independence, also found their way to America and joined the scene. In Boston, for example, the Winter Hill Gang, led by James McLean, held dominance for decades. In New York's Hell's Kitchen, the Westies became a fearsome name. But again, endless turf wars and internal betrayal weakened the Irish once more. Meanwhile, America faced new waves of immigration, and with them, new gangs, Chinese triads, Latin American cartels, Black and Puerto Rican street crews, Russian mobsters, Haitian gangs, and many others. The Sicilian Mafia gave way to the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, and the Irish were eventually replaced by Albanian and other rising criminal groups. The era of the 20th century underworld, where Sicilian mafiosi and Irish gangsters reigned supreme, has faded into the past. That's all for now, friends. See you next time.